Okay, so Thomas is going to read you a story in a moment. It's a story my wife and I read repeatedly to our youngest son, Graydon, when he was, well, young. So I guess it would be appropriate to call this a story for all ages. It comes from this book of Buddhist tales. But please don't let that set you up for a story full of deep, respectful, oh, so serious wisdom. Graydon's reaction to the end of this story was always laughter. And even to this day, he still laughs about it.
Useless work. An old monk and a young monk were walking along the road when they came to a rushing stream. It was neither too wide nor too deep, and they were about to wade across when a beautiful young woman who had been waiting on the bank approaching them. She was elegantly dressed. She was fluttering her fan and batting her eyelashes at them, especially to the young monk. "Oh," she said, "the current is so swift and the water is so cold, and if my kimono gets wet, it will spoil the silk. Won't one of you please carry me across the stream?" And she edged invitingly toward the young monk. Now, the young monk thought the woman's behavior was disgusting. He thought she was spoiled and shameless and ought to be taught a lesson. On top of that, monks are not supposed to have anything to do with women, so he ignored her completely and waded across the stream. But the old monk gave a shrug, picked up the young woman, carried her across the water, and set her down on the other side. The two monks continued on their way down the road. Though they walked in silence, the young monk was furious. He thought his companion had done entirely the wrong thing by indulging that spoiled young woman. And even worse, by touching her, he had broken the monk's rule. He raved and ranted in his mind as they walked over the hills and through the fields. Finally, he could stand it no longer. Shouting loudly, he began scolding his companion for carrying the woman across the stream. He was beside himself with anger and completely red in the face. "Oh dear," said the old monk, "are you still carrying that woman? I put her down an hour ago." He gave a shrug and continued down the road.
Okay, just sit right back and you'll hear a tale. The tale of a fateful trip that started from a tropic port aboard a tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailing man. The skipper, brave and sure. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour. A 3-hour tour. So let me see a quick show of hands. How many of you did not recognize this pop culture reference? Ooh, okay. Really? Okay. Where have you been? I was hoping we'd have some young visitors here today so I could tell them, you are the future of Unitarian Universalism. Uh-oh. Anyway, as for the rest of you, most of you who did recognize it, if that ditty pops into your head this afternoon, tonight, or later this week and develops into a really annoying earworm, you know who to blame. That was the first verse of the theme song to Gilligan's Island, a sitcom featuring a lot of slapstick humor that had a short-lived run on network TV in the mid-1960s, followed by a run in syndication that may go on forever. In my youth, I watched it regularly, you might say religiously, every afternoon after school. The premise of the show was that 7 people with very different personalities and backgrounds were shipwrecked on an uncharted desert island. This diverse group made an odd little community, living in huts, but kind of diverse, I guess, in their own way. They created amusements for themselves. My first exposure to Hamlet was the Gilligan's Island version. But these castaways also sought ways to be rescued or escape the island, only to be unwittingly foiled by the titular character, sweethearted but ultimately bumbling Gilligan. Sherwood Schwartz, who provided our opening words today, was the creator of Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch too. And it's no coincidence that there were 7 very disparate people stranded on that island. He revealed in an interview that the inspiration for those characters came from the 7 deadly sins. Now, I don't expect this group to have those sins committed to memory, but if you have an idea about which sin is associated with the characters as I describe them, feel free to shout it out. First off, we have Gilligan, first mate of the shipwrecked SS Minnow. Lovable but incompetent, he never seemed to get anything productive done. The only thing he was any good at was screwing things up. So he represented sloth. Very good. Then we have the skipper, Gilligan's boss, essentially. They had a close relationship for the most part, but the skipper's frustrations with his little buddy's screw-ups burst out in fits of anger. Then we have Ginger, the glamorous and seductive movie star, representing, no surprise here,
Lust. Excessive lust.
I guess so. There's her roommate, Marianne, the cute and perky farm girl from Kansas, who unfortunately made herself miserable by comparing herself unfavorably to Ginger. So she stood for envy. And there was a millionaire who, for whatever reason, took a cruise ship on a very ordinary boat, bringing along suitcases filled with cash. No good at all on an island. Equal parts egotistical and ignorant, he epitomized greed. Like her husband, the millionaire's wife, despite her common predicament with the other castaways, couldn't relate to the hoi polloi around her. A slave to her lavish lifestyle, she somehow had multiple suitcases of glamorous dresses with her and always wanted more. Perhaps not related to eating, as the word may imply, she illustrated gluttony. And lastly, there was the professor, the nerdy professor. Although he could only get the radio to work for very brief periods, he could make almost any contraption out of coconut shells. But he never thought of a way to successfully get them off the island. He could run circles around everyone else with his intellect, and although I don't remember him lording it over them, I guess he embodied the overarching 7 deadly sins. So the 7 deadly sins aren't in the Bible, at least not explicitly. In early form, they existed not as sins, but as evil thoughts. And there was one more of them, so it was 8 evil thoughts. These were dreamed up by a monk in the 4th century as a guide for fellow monks in the Eastern Church, the Eastern Christian Church, so they could avoid thoughts that might interfere with their spiritual practice. A great goal, and I realize this list predates psychology and ironic process theory by 1,500 years or so, but I can't help but wonder how that worked out for those monks. Here's a list of things to avoid thinking about. It's kind of like me issuing a decree from this pulpit that you all shall keep all images of a purple penguin from entering your head for the next 30 seconds. Well, the 8 evil thoughts traveled from east to west, where they were translated from Greek to Latin, then edited and served up by one of the 6th century popes as the 7 deadly sins. And they persist, even in popular culture today, inspiring fear, silly sitcoms, movie thrillers, and in some cases, decent human behavior. Let's now travel in time to the year 1925. It seems there was something going on in the zeitgeist that year, something signaling that the 7 deadly sins needed a cultural shift. Perhaps it was a reaction to the war that ended in 1919, the same war that, unfortunately, was falsely advertised as the war to end all wars. In 1925, on the Indian subcontinent, a man named Gandhi, during a period he wasn't in prison, continued his nonviolent resistance to British rule. And so it was that 99 years ago, Mohandas Gandhi, also known as Mahatma Gandhi, published an article in the newspaper Young India outlining the 7 social sins. To this day, they are attributed to him and have become part of his legacy. But it turns out that he only quoted these social sins in the article. He did not invent them. They were created several months earlier by another social justice warrior, living, ironically enough, in England. Frederick Lewis Donaldson was an Anglican priest who served the poor and worked for women's suffrage. 100 years ago, this coming March, in a sermon to his congregation, he served up the 7 social sins. They made their way to India in the intervening months. Gandhi only ever said that he received them from a friend. Whether that person was Donaldson or someone else, we don't know. Anyway, I have a feeling these 7 social sins may resonate more deeply with present company than the 7 deadly ones. So here they are, in order. 1, wealth without work. 2, pleasure without conscience. 3, knowledge without character. 4, commerce without morality. 5, science without humanity. 6, religion without sacrifice. 7, politics without principle. Can we agree these are an improvement on envy, lust, and all those others? But still, the whole concept of sin serves to, unlike the 1940s song, accentuate the negative, not the positive. Even in their switch from deadly to social, they still serve to remind us about what's bad. How hard would it be to transform number 4, say, to commerce with morality? Number 5, to science with humanity? Number 7, to politics with principle? Now, offhand, can any of you think of a group of 7 values that stay largely positive? Anybody? Yeah. Our UU principles seem to do that. Now, I don't know if the number 7 was intentionally chosen to counteract those deadly sins, but I have to admit, our 7 principles are a nice alternative. And we're not forced to commit them to memory. That's what the internet's for. Nor is anyone keeping score on which ones you follow, how well you follow them, or how often. I've been watching The Good Place lately, and I like how it highlights the ridiculousness of scorekeeping. Well, maybe it's not entirely true that people aren't keeping track of what you're doing. I see all of you regularly, and I think you're doing pretty well with these values of ours. Probably, like a lot of you, I was raised in a tradition that, once I started analyzing it, didn't make much sense to me. On one hand, there were hymns that proclaimed, "They'll know we are Christians by our love." And on the other hand, there was an undercurrent of fear, guilt, and shame that discouraged rather than motivated me. But still, it is a part of my history, and there are silver linings that I recognize. But mostly I'm grateful for our denomination, one that accepts sources as broad as the humanist teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, Frederick Lewis Donaldson, and Sherwood Schwartz, the creator of Gilligan's Island. I'm grateful for a denomination that doesn't have sin. Or do we? I like to think that I appreciate the shades of gray and hues of color in the world around me, as most everything in life seems to be on a continuum, from sexuality to electromagnetism. But there's this habit we humans have developed, ever true in this modern digital world. We make things binary, black or white, off or on, right or wrong. And UUs aren't immune. What are some UU sins? Well, if we value peace, then war must be a sin. And if we value justice, what would you call inequity? Am I saying that we should not call for peace? Am I suggesting that we should not resist injustice when we see it? No, not at all. But here's an idea for something else to resist. Resist the urge to stand up in outrage, mouth open, pointing at some transgressor. If it wasn't obvious on November 6th, there's something that may be more obvious a month later. If we want to see the social values we cherish uplifted, if that's what we truly want, then it's going to take more than calling attention to the endless supply of social sins and sinners that appear rarely in the flesh, but are constantly supplied to us on our screens. Now, if you, like me, need some help in resisting the urge to pass judgment, come back here in a month. Rev Laura will have some advice for us in the new year. In the meantime, I hope to provide a little inspiration to you and a return to popular culture. In an episode of the hit show Ted Lasso, Ted relayed a story about being underestimated, quoting Walt Whitman. The saying is a really good one. Be curious, not judgmental. Except, kind of like Gandhi getting credit for the work of another, there's no record of Walt Whitman ever saying or writing those words. It actually came from an advice column printed in a North Carolina newspaper in 1986. But in the end, does that even matter? I find inspiration from being around all of you, and I like looking for it and finding it in others beyond these walls. Yesterday, I found much more inspiration that I was expecting or bargained for when I attended a Mormon memorial service for a friend's mother. And I think I found it precisely because I was preparing this service and taking a tip from those of you who I know to be curious, not judgmental. Another way to find inspiration is in music. That's something else I find here every week. It's such a treat to have the many offerings and gifts of people, words, and song showered upon us week after week after week, right here in this room. Songs provide such a unique, quick path deep into the heart and soul. Could it hurt to give up a little bit of screen time this week and seek out a favorite bit of music that touches your heart and soul in some way? A song that came up for me as I mulled over this topic of sins and values and such was one that, more succinctly than I can write, offers advice for moving forward in the world. We can gain strength from each other, yes, but never underestimate what you possess. I give you the words of Peter Dennis Blanford Townsend of the rock group The Who wrote these words that are from pop culture but would fit right into our hymnal. We've got to have faith in something bigger. Faith in something bigger. Faith in something big inside ourselves. I conclude by returning to our chalice lighting and the question Sherwood Schwartz posed to himself when creating Gilligan's Island. where could you put a group of people? What self-contained space could you put a group of people where they could work out what he called the most important idea, how to get along? An uncharted tropical island? A fellowship hall? A city? A country? The halls of Congress? Or how about an exquisite blue marble of life floating impossibly in the midst of a vast cosmos? The answer is, there were 7 of them. Yes, 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 and? Yes. All 7 of them.